Good afternoon and welcome to part 2 of Christ-Centered Reflections on Worship. Yeah, now you gave me another key word, a different place and a different context. So let's unpack again. Let's keep unpacking that piece of expectation, of expecting to see one another, of expecting to see God. Mm-hmm. So at its very earliest, there was that sense of expectation. I expect to see my God. I expect to be there with the other humans, and we're all encountering God in Genesis 1. And then sin happens, and today, one reason people give for not going to worship is they feel, I can't go in there because I'm not right with God. Yeah. I can't go in there because I don't have the right clothes. Mm-hmm. I can't go in there because they don't like me. Right. I can't go in there because I don't know what to do. Right. There's so many reasons that people have for I can't go in there. Those reasons are the same reasons from 1912. The difference between 1912 and 2012 is choice. In 1912, you went to worship because that's what everybody did. But everybody was going to worship on Sunday. It was an expectation. It was an obligation. Mm-hmm. And whether or not you were right or not, you got to solve that in worship. Somewhere along the way, that sense that you have to be right started to diminish. That sense of, I'm going to hide from God by not even going to where God is, And then ultimately, God ain't in there anyway. I can worship God on my porch. I can turn on 103.5. I can open my Bible, and I can listen to the music. Because, worship begins with music, and then there's the scripture, and then there's the sermon. So on my porch, 103.5 at 11 o'clock. So why worship here?
The word worship and the word church are two words that come to us both as a place and an experience and a community. So is worship an experience? Is worship a place? Is church a community? Is church a building? Can you have church someplace without the community? If you pick and create a perfect community, is that church? Isn't if it's a community, isn't it supposed to have some of those rough edges to it? When I've created something that's a perfect place for me to worship, I've created an idol. Right. And no wonder it works so well. I've designed it to work well. There's not going to be any challenge here. I'm picking what I want to hear. The idea of being in a community and being in worship says that I commit myself to a group of people with all of our warts and whatever, and we commit ourselves to a God who sees all our warts and says, "Still come," rather than you've got to be a particular way. If Sunday's a special day, then it is right to have a place and designate it as a place. This is going to be a special place. Right. Yeah, you can fry chicken in the middle of the church. That doesn't turn it into a kitchen. And you can have worship on your porch. That doesn't turn it into a church. Right. It's about a dedicated purpose and a dedicated people. Dedicated means we don't step away from it when it becomes uncomfortable. Oh, it's no air conditioning. I'm not going to church. It's not about the comfort. Right. It's about, are you ready to worship the Lord? Yes, God can appear anywhere. But like we made a date to be here. He promised he'd meet us here. Right. We're not going to welch on the date. That's right. Say, no, you come to me. we treat God with disregard, I think, when we say we're going to worship you, but we surely want it to be about us and on our schedule and in our place and with our comfort.
And God directs us how to worship. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. The opposite of spirit is, bodily, and the opposite of truth is falsehood. Yeah. And you mentioned sin. People make a choice. They make a volitional choice that I'm not going to do it the way God said, and I'm going to be satisfied. Well, he also told us not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is. Yeah. So it is our obligation when we have the opportunity, we have our health and our strength, that we come together for worship to give God the glory, honor, and praise. And I think that goes to what Brother Stephen has said and Sister Donna.
Well, I want to kind of segue to one of the more famous scriptures on worship, and that's in 2 Chronicles 6:40. And a lot has happened in worship between Genesis and 2 Chronicles. By the time Solomon's temple came on, there were these things that God said, I want you to have this, I want you to have that, I want you to have that. And so Solomon and the folk started putting that together. All right, we're going to build it this many cubits, and we're going to make a building, and we're going to have gold, and we're going to have singers,
Yes.
and we're going to have all of this stuff. So they got everything done, and then God also gave responsibilities for people to contribute. There was stewardship introduced. Your family, you guys can sing.
Right.
Y'all are going to sing. There wasn't any option
Right,
on
right,
that.
right.
Your family, you're craftsmen. Guess what?
Build.
You will craft.
Right.
Your family, your scholars, you will teach.
Yes.
There wasn't anybody saying, I don't think so. Because everybody was contributing to this space
Right.
in which the Lord is to be worshipped. And then everybody did what they were commanded to do. And it says in 2 Chronicles 6:40, now, my God, may your eyes be open and your ears attentive to the prayers that are offered in this place. Now arise, O Lord, and come to your resting place, you and the ark of your might. And may your priests, O Lord, be clothed with salvation, and may your saints rejoice in your goodness. O Lord, don't reject your anointed ones. Remember the great love promised to David your servant. And when Solomon finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the offering and the sacrifice. And the glory of the Lord filled the temple so that the priests couldn't even go in. Now that they were having worship. Ascribing worth to God in response to all that God had done, and in response to all that God had commanded. And so they did what the Lord told them to do, and God's presence arrived. Worship and God and stewardship and fellowship and all of that flow together in this place.
Right.
And so for that sense of where should worship happen? Should it happen on the porch? Should it happen on my couch? Should it happen in a place? There's room in the Bible for all the ways that we worship. And it would limit God to say you can only worship God in church. God is in worship on the porch. God is in worship wherever we come into the presence of God. We have the opportunity to worship God.
Yes.
So the early saints in the garden worshiped God just walking through the garden. Cain and Abel just found a spot. Noah found a spot. People found that spot that meant something to them. Jacob found a spot and worshiped God. But God also provided a place and said, this place will be holy. This is a place where I will always be. This is a place where you can come and meet with me at any time, and I will meet with you. It does honor God to be able to have that place which God asked us to create. And churches and all types of worship spaces are built on that place. However, we also have what Jesus did when he went through that veil, or when the veil was torn down. And those scriptures that say that the temple of God now rests in our heart. The temple of God that's in our heart gives people permission to worship on the porch. But it doesn't take away the spaces that God has inspired us to create for worship. So my last question, which somehow we've answered a little bit, has to do with us walking in a time in this 21st century where we can honor the porch and we can honor the church and look at all the ways that we meet with each other and meet with God as being sacred. The place is ordained, the porch is ordained, the heart is ordained. However, there's something else that happens in churches that has to do with fellowship, that has to do with stewardship, that has to do with the spread of the gospel to all nations, that has to do with the healing of survival of the people, that has to do with a space where all of those people who already worship God somewhere can come together and be about the Lord's business. However, there's something that does seem to happen when people gather specifically in a place and worship God, that takes worship perhaps might take it to another level that we don't want to miss.
I think the scripture described worship as a natural reaction to God. That there's no instruction for Cain and Abel. They just get up one day and they do it. But something else happens in the corporate setting. Somehow we understand that there is not just a value, but a strengthening for us when we do this. There always is this danger that when we make worship about us, then it loses whatever it's supposed to have.
I was camping Lake Superior on the shore. It was a moving thing, and I would say it was a time of worship. But as much as I'm mesmerized by the sound of the water and the sound of the trees, I think it lessens our experience as humanity to be isolated always, and the importance of coming together. Because my worship alone is going to be different than my worship in concert. Because there will be reflections and there will be responses between all of us, and there will be senses among all of us. And again, which brings us into this community of worship. Yes, I can worship in the middle of the forest. I can worship on the seashore, and at times that's probably a really good thing. However, I think it is important, or even vital, to keep in mind and action that it is not good for us to be alone.
And I'm going to piggyback on that a little bit. And I can worship with my family. I know my family. My family knows me. We've got an unspoken language. We know how far to push one another. We know when to back up. When I come into worship with all the families, then it stretches my human capability to extend love. Right. So that's another reason for the cause.
Worship for me, similar to Brother Jay, is like kindling wood. I learned a lot about starting a fire, and both our corporate and our personal responsibility. I used to think that you needed big logs to start a fire, and found out that in order to start it, it has to be these small pieces. And in both the corporate and personal relationship, I think that God has ordained that we have a personal prayer life, that we have a personal worship life. And then when we come together,
what a time.
Boy, what a time. For me, you can tell if a person is praying, if they're praying on behalf of the people, because there's a fire that starts that encourages people. So I think the one good thing that has come is that God has ordained the church. He has ordained a place and time for us to come together. And the more we do that, the more we show that he is worthy to be praised. But also we show the genuineness of the tone we set in fellowship.
Thank you for your attention. Look for additional video reflections in the future. And if you have questions or comments on this topic that you would like to see covered, please be sure to post them on either the White Rock YouTube channel or our Facebook page.